Hello everybody, and welcome to those of you from outside of Imperial to this event. I'm Jo Haigh, and I am co-director of the Grantham Institute Climate Change and Environment here at Imperial, and we're very pleased to be co-hosting this event alongside the Energy Futures Lab. Our shared interest, of course, is how to get to a low-carbon future, and key to that will be the energy supply. And of course, greening up the energy supply and using renewables is going to require us to have better energy storage. So we've got a very eminent panel here today. But before I pass over to the chair of the meeting, I'd like to make sure that you've all seen the briefing paper that's just come hot off the press today, written by Sheridan here and co-authors from the Grantham Institute. It's a briefing paper on energy storage. So I'll pass over now to Anthony Kucernak, who is going to chair the event.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Anthony Kucernak. I'm co-director of the Energy Futures Lab, and it's great to see all of you in the audience today. It's nice to see that we've got a very nice turnout. Both the Energy Futures Lab and the Grantham Institute run a whole range of these sorts of events. So if you haven't signed up to the Energy Futures Lab mailing list, I certainly recommend that you do so on the way out. If you just see one of the people that have helped organise, that ticked your name off at the beginning, you can go on the mailing list and learn about all the other events that we have. So anyway, just to give you an idea about what's going to happen today, as we've already heard, we've got a group of very eminent panellists here today to discuss this topic: where is energy storage going? The way we're going to run it today is that each of the panel members are actually going to get a chance to give a 5-minute presentation on what their particular take on this area is. And after each of them have spoken for 5 minutes, we're then going to open up to the audience and to other members and the panel members themselves to ask sets of questions. Okay, and that's maybe so we can actually understand this area in greater detail. And I hope you're all going to manage to actually come up with some really cracking questions, some difficult questions to ask these guys. And then once that's finished, we're going to go outside, and we've actually got some drinks and a small reception afterwards, to which you're all invited to. So I'd like to welcome all our panel members, and I'd like to introduce them first of all. So. First of all, I'd like to introduce Cathy McClay, who's currently Head of Commercial Operations at National Grid. She's previously worked at EDF and Nuon and has a distinguished career in the energy field, working on analysis, modelling and risk management. Yeah, there's some places in the front. Come. Oh, hi, Tom. She was heavily involved with EDF's interactions with competitions and markets authority on both wholesale and retail markets. And she recently was named one of the top 50 influential women in engineering. So she's going to give us a very good background into where the pain is in terms of the network providers. Next to her is Professor Goran Strabak. He's a professor of energy systems here at Imperial College, where he's in the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering. His expertise is in the modelling and analysis of operations planning, security and economics of energy systems. And he's a member of the steering committee of the Smart Grids European Technology Platform and director of the UK Centre for Grid-Scale Energy Storage. And Goran's going to give us an overview of modelling of global systems. If we go to the left-hand side here, your left-hand side, we have Dr. Mark Barrett. And Mark is Senior Lecturer at UCL's Energy Institute. He has more than 30 years' experience in modelling and developing policies for energy demand and supply systems, and transport systems as well. He's worked in international, national and regional levels in the UK, Europe and Asia for clients in academia, industry and policy making. And I think, Mark's going to give us quite a nice overview of some of the modelling that he's done in these sorts of systems. And next to Mark is Dr. Sheridan Few. Sheridan is a member of the Grantham Institute, as we've already heard, and you've got a copy of this report in which he was author or co-author. And he's a research associate at the Grantham Institute. His work focuses on mitigation strategies and how we can make a rapid and sustainable transition to a low-carbon energy system. His current work is on energy storage technologies for balancing renewables. And as you see, as I've already mentioned, he worked with AJ on this paper. So let's give a big round of applause to our panel members, first of all, for coming tonight. And I'll ask Dr. McClay to actually start with her 5-minute discussion.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to talk at this event. I actually spent some time here a very long time ago now, and it's great to be back, although I'm slightly worried that one of my final year lecturers for power systems is in the audience, and he may be horrified at how much I've forgotten in the meantime, given I've spent most of my career in trading and risk management, but I'm going to do my best. So I have to start by saying I'm not an expert in storage technology, but I'm a potential customer of storage. So I work in the system operator part of National Grid. We're in two bits, the transmission operator, who owns and operates the wires part of the business, and then the system operator who's responsible for balancing the system in real time. The market that we've got in the UK is a self-dispatch market, so generators and demand basically do what they want, and then National Grid and the system operator balance the difference by increasing, decreasing generation and demand to keep frequency at 50 hertz inside a range in real time. My role in the system operator is I'm head of commercial for electricity. So my job is to set everything up for the control room, who then balance things in real time. So it starts 4 years out, where I'm running the capacity market that we've got in the UK, and also the market for renewables, the contract for differences market. I'm also responsible for buying all of the balancing services ahead of time that we can use for balancing the system, and then moving into the real-time operations, so all the demand forecasting, setting up the strategy of how we're actually going to manage the system in real time, and doing all the trading to get it ready to hand over to the control room at day ahead. So my job essentially is to buy response and reserve for the system. So response is stuff that moves up and down in response to the frequency. So frequency response, and reserve is stuff we can bring on when things fall off. I've made my job sound really simple, haven't I? But in a nutshell, that's what we do. And storage is actually capable of doing both. And it's been doing it for years in the system. My first job when I left Imperial was to work for First Hydro Company, the Norwegian Vestiniog Pump Storage, which is where I first met Goran actually as well, a long time ago now. And they've been providing services to Grid for years. And I also get services from a lot of other technologies, from coal, gas, flexible plant, from the interconnectors in the system, from demand side, which is really a form of virtual storage, if you like. And what I really want is, I'm technology agnostic in my job. What I want is flexibility. That's what I'm after, stuff that can move up and down that helps me manage the system. Now, the reason I joined Grid 10 months ago is that it's a really interesting time, because it's getting more and more challenging to actually balance the system. So for the last 10 years, we probably did the same thing. We bought the same amount of services each year, and we pretty much ran them the same. But with the introduction of more and more renewables on the system, so particularly solar and wind, that's caused a big difference for us. Everyone kind of knows about intermittency of wind, but that's not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is actually inertia in the system in summer is one of the main challenges, where flexibility helps us a lot. So what inertia is that if we get a change because the generator falls off, the inertia in the system determines how quickly the frequency changes. So when you've got lots of big rotating masses in the system, that kind of damps it, and we've got time to sort things out. When we've got a lot of solar and wind that's connected through power electronics, they don't exhibit that inertia. So when there's a step change, things happen much quicker. So we can, when we're looking forward, we run studies out 20 years as to what might happen in the system. If we're just looking out at 2020, we're estimating we need at least 30% more reserve services on our system in summer than we do right now. And we can either carry more or we can get faster, so we can get faster response. And that's one area where we're looking at lithium-ion batteries, et cetera, at the minute, because typically our frequency response comes on in about 3 seconds. If we can get it on in about 1 second, that's worth, in summer, about 1.5 times to us, that 2-second difference in terms of how much value it has to us. So we're actually doing work at the minute. We've got a tender out to buy 200 megawatts of enhanced frequency response 1 second stuff. We opened this tender with a expression of interest. I think it was even before I joined, and we were surprised when we got over 1 gigawatt of expressions of interest for the tender. So there's a lot out there, and we'll be closing that in a couple of weeks, and then the results will be out in August. We've already bought 20 megawatts of battery that's going to be coming online. And we use that to help us understand how to design the service. And we're also doing an awful lot with demand side virtual storage, because what we're trying to do is keep the pretty inflexible but low carbon stuff on as much as possible and flex demand to meet that. So we're actually kind of swapping around how we used to run the system. Where do I see storage versus all the other things? I see it can do a lot of things in the system, as can my other forms of flexibility. I've talked about response and reserve. It can also probably manage voltage support. It can allow us not to have to invest in the network, manage constraints. It can be arbitraged between day and night, like we've got pumped storage. And there's lots of different types of storage, and they'll all have different characteristics, and some of them will suit my services more than others. And where I'm looking at things right now, it's a bit of a step change. I can still get all the services I want from conventional generation pretty much. But when we've looked at things, we've seen that we probably need 30 to 50% of our services from non-traditional sources by 2020. And we've created a power responsive campaign to try and encourage that. It's not very far to go from, typically right now it's about 10%. So it's a pretty big increase we're looking at. And the things that I struggle with in my role that I'm trying to work on is what sort of market structure will actually allow that flexibility to be rewarded adequately? And how do we make sure that it's financeable, that people can build an investment case on the market that we set up? Technically, we've kind of worked out what we need to do quite a lot of the time. It's just how we bring the right resources together. And now is quite a key time because Ofgem and DEC are particularly interested in flexibility right now. And there's going to be a call for evidence from them in about I think in the next couple of weeks to talk about flexibility on the system, and storage will be a subset of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that very interesting overview of the interesting times you have ahead. So next I'd like to ask Sheridan Few to actually give his 5-minute talk on...
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks for the introductions, and yeah, thanks for the interesting talk, and thank you all for coming. So I guess I'll start talking a bit about some of the themes in this briefing paper, which you should all have a copy of, looking at kind of electrical energy storage and some for climate change mitigation and some of the background to that. So some of this Cathy will have touched on, but Governments around the world have committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions significantly over the coming decades, and a big chunk of those come from energy, and within that, a big and growing chunk from electricity. At the moment, 60% of electricity is generated with fossil fuels, which release a lot of greenhouse gases, and about 6% with intermittent renewables. But intermittent renewables are one of the fastest growing source of energy in the world at the moment. So finding ways to provide energy when the sun's not shining from solar power and when the wind's not blowing is important. And also these other balancing services on the grid that Cathy mentioned, so keeping the frequency right of the alternating current and voltage support and these kinds of things have a big role as well. So my research is more focused on the technologies that are available, so I'll talk a bit about that. And I think we're probably going to see a range of energy storage technologies in the future based on the range of requirements we have. So different scales. If you're on an off-grid scale, you need something that can kind of fit into your house and can give you energy reasonably quickly and store a reasonable quantity of energy. At the moment, that's probably going to be some form of battery. On a larger scale, you have more different requirements. So you can have devices that store electrical energy as kind of chemical energy, thermal energy, or mechanical energy. And you have a range of temporal scales you might want to give supply on. So especially for this frequency response that Cathy talked about, you might want something that acts very quickly and can give you power very quickly, but may not be able to store such a large amount of energy. So flywheels and supercapacitors might be good for this. Other things that are slower response but can store a lot of energy for not too high a cost. So things like pumped hydro and compressed air and maybe thermal technologies. And some things that are a balance between these. So batteries would be an example that can give you energy quickly and store a lot of energy, but maybe aren't the cheapest for either of those independently. Some of the challenges with these technologies, they haven't yet been trialed on a very large scale yet, or not the scale that we're going to need them to balance the changes that we're going to see in our energy and electricity system in the future. And there are a range of technologies, as I alluded to, and for many of them, because they're not that mature, the costs and technical characteristics and environmental impact as well aren't that well defined as yet. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future energy system will look like, so it's quite hard for someone to invest a lot in storage, though I'm sure Joanna will allude to, in a lot of energy systems there's a big value for storage, but it's without knowing what the energy system is going to look like, it's hard to make big investments in storage. And my research is focused on understanding how the costs and technical characteristics of storage technologies could develop, and the role that research and development and scaling up could play in pushing those costs down, how we should pay attention to environmental impact. Kind of probably by a kind of 2030 time scale, the things we're likely to see are going to be things that already exist and have been deployed on some level or a small variance of those, just because of the time it takes to go from inventing something in a lab to getting something working on a bigger scale. But small tweaks to what we see at the moment might see some of those. I'll also say briefly, I know Mark's going to say more about it, but electrical energy storage technologies has been my focus. But if you're looking at a whole energy system, then thinking about other kinds of flexibility, interconnections, and heat storage are going to be important too. So I'll leave that to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sheridan, and that leads us straight into Mark. So Mark, please.
Thanks very much for the invitation, and good to see such a big audience. I'll try and keep myself to 5 minutes. First of all, we do a lot of energy system modelling to try and look at what will happen with the electrification of heating and transport, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and the supply with wind and solar. And in fact, we license a model to National Grid to look at this very thing at their Winnersh Operations Centre to see what the likely evolution of demand and supply patterns will be. On storage, currently we use storage in terms of fossil fuels and we can just dig up more or open the valves on our oil and gas and coal to meet varying demands, possibly via generators. And it's going to be very difficult to replace some of this. For example, to heat the bricks up on a cold winter's morning, we currently consume about 200 gigawatts of gas just to heat up cold bricks. And if you think about how you're going to do that, and this, of course, is storage in the bricks, and how you're going to do that with electricity is a major challenge. So it's on a very large scale. All storage has costs and losses. And so you only want storage if it reduces system costs elsewhere in the system by more than the costs and losses of the storage. Storage and transmission provide some of the same benefits in that storage you can use for time-shifting energy flows from one time period to another. Transmission you can use for evening out demands across different time zones, and of course the supplies of wind and renewable energy as they fluctuate in different geographical areas. And so, to a certain extent, storage and transmission compete with each other. And a very difficult challenge is to find the optimum combination of those. And particularly that means, of course, with transmission, going very long distances, possibly beyond Europe, into Asia and down into Africa, because those are the sort of scales we have meteorological patterns. Electricity storage is generally inefficient and expensive compared to other forms of storage. So you have to have very good arguments for why you want electricity storage per se. For example, heat storage and district heating in buildings, and you can store heat in buildings both actively and passively in the fabric of buildings, is very, very important. So for example, at the moment, in domestic hot water tanks, there's probably about 5 million of them, and it's 15 gigawatts of electric immersion power you have there, and maybe 50 gigawatt hours of heat. If you look at off-peak electric heating, there's 10 gigawatts of that, with about 50 gigawatt hours again. This is 20 times the pump storage power and energy capacity of Denoric. It's huge, absolutely huge. Heat storage is used on a very large scale in other countries, particularly in district heating schemes, where, as with all forms of storage, there are big economies of scale. And so heat storage in a district heating scheme will be about 1% or 5% of the cost per kilowatt hour as compared to heat storage in your house, even assuming there were room in your house for it. And if you don't have heat storage in your house, can you possibly replace a 25 kilowatt power shower with an electric heat pump? Is that possible? And then we also have chemical storage of, if we're going to use ammonia, say, for powering ships, or hydrogen, then you can store the chemical fuels that you've made with electricity. And again, the losses in the storage are much lower than throughput in electric batteries. For a 100% renewable system, you might be talking about something of the order of 70 terawatt hours of storage required. And this will vary very dramatically from year to year, because the wind power, for example, fluctuates by plus or minus 10 to 20% from one year to another. And then finally, even assuming that you come up with a good view of what the best options are, constructing a market for investing and operating storage is a really significant challenge. Thank you.
Very much, Mark, and we'll ask Goran to actually round things off with his 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Following on this, elephant in the room with storage is that it costs lots of money, it's expensive, and using the example of Denoric, which is the pump storage scheme in North Wales, it wastes between 25 and 30% of energy you put in. How desperate you need to be to want that. And the pump storage scheme in Denoric, if you ever go to in North Wales, please go and visit this. It's a fascinating plant. Electric Mountain engineers have made it. But the commercial business case our analysis demonstrates wasn't there. It's even now just about to be there. But what's important is where we want to go going forward. And what the same analysis demonstrates, how difficult it's going to be if we want to decarbonize electricity system. That our modeling says even with these very high costs and very inefficient, that we want to have by 2030 about 7 denowics and about more than 15 denowics in 2050. That is how difficult management of that system would be. This is just using the example as how important flexibility will be in low carbon energy systems. Cathy said, for example, the overall volume of this flexibility is less than 2% of the overall energy market today. In 2030, our analysis suggests is going to be more than 25% of the overall energy. So it's a growing order of magnitude or more going forward. And making that low carbon system with inflexible nuclear and variable wind and solar together with this big issue regarding the inertia, which wasn't clear until recently how big that topic is, we would have a major challenge, and potentially storage is technology which potentially could provide it. One of the core aspects of storage is this potential for multi-service provision, which is not only balancing demand and supply at the national level, but also supporting operation of the cables on the Queensgate and Exhibition Road. From there to national and international level, all together simultaneously. So networks at the local level, generation in terms of, when we know when wind will be there and not be there, we can do what's called energy arbitrage, but also balancing of demand and supply, frequency regulation, capacity provision. Also, there is a big important element which hasn't been fully recognized, which is also to do with low carbon generation mix. When we analyzed scenarios from the government, which got a low carbon generation in terms of electricity side, nuclear and wind, we demonstrated that in 2050, if we had storage at a cost-effective price, it could be also virtual storage, we would need to build 14 gigawatts less nuclear or 25 gigawatts less offshore wind, because we can make better use of what we've got while maintaining the carbon target. So you can put, and given that low carbon technologies are expensive, so if we can make better use of less of them, the benefit of that is incredibly big. There is also one other element of benefit which is not also necessarily very well recognized, is what we call option value of these technologies. Because we say the only thing which is certain about future energy systems is uncertainty, which is big. And then, if you take this into account properly, what happens is that when you analyze scenarios, and you say, if this happens, what should I do? This happens, what should I do? And then you get solutions on infrastructure, for example, but then you say, but I actually don't know which of these will materialize. What should I do? Suddenly, expensive storage becomes answer, which because it provides flexibility to deal with uncertainty, which is another very important aspect of it. So, and there is obviously big issues around how we organize the market, which would enable all of these provision of these services to actually be accessed by whoever does the job. Of course, storage is not the only solution for provision of flexibility. There is demand side, heat. Also, there are potentially also around other energy vectors such as gas. So the competition is potentially quite significant, and there is quite a good evidence that some of these virtual storage, which was mentioned in terms of heat, for example, would certainly reduce the need for electricity storage, but it doesn't quite disappear fully. It's not, you cannot still, the models, choose that even if we had, so that the mix of this source of technology which provide flexibility will be a core for what we say facilitating cost-effective transition to low-carbon future. And storage has got a role to play in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Goran. Before I open the questions to the audience, I'm going to ask our panel members, do they have any questions amongst themselves that they would like to ask each other, or comments on what they've heard from each of the others, to give you a chance to say something about what the others have said? No, they're not going to question each other.
Give the audience a chance.
Give the audience a chance? Okay, so we have a first question over there, please.
Very quick points. LNG reheating during and after transport, that's a problem. EDF in China, policy challenges, and the German law changes of green energy.
What was the first
I think that's
question?
one for Cora.
What was the question?
I don't know. It's just comments.
After transport?
Right. Well, they're not necessarily to do with storage, these questions, are they? LNG is obviously a
structure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, trying to keep it on the storage theme, obviously LNG storage is, again, a form of storage. And again, it's as I remarked, it's a flexible, when you have storage like that, it's a flexible, in this case, fossil fuel that's stored. But it could, of course, equally be, we haven't talked about storage of biogas or biomass, for example, into combined heat and power and district heating. These are all forms of storage. And I would just remark, virtual storage, it's all storage. Storing clean dishes in your dishwasher is storage.
Yep.
It's not virtual, it's actual storage of a service. So it's heat storage, so it's electricity storage, so it's gas storage, and you have to look at them all together and try and find the best mix of those.
Maybe I can use Chairman's prerogative and actually ask you all a question. So you've given us sort of an interesting discussion, mostly centred around the UK, but of course our leaders have told us that we actually have to look beyond the UK. We're looking out beyond the UK and embracing the world. Do you see the UK as actually being anything special in terms of this area? Are there any special issues that we have to deal with? Are there any special things, benefits that we actually have? And how does that compare to the rest of the world?
So maybe I can start. We're pretty special along with Ireland, and I would say that with my accent. We're an island power system. We're only connected to the rest of Europe through DC interconnectors. So the inertia of our system is a lot lighter. And so we're seeing the issues quicker. Now, what was interesting for me is I went to visit EirGrid in Ireland a couple of months ago. And it was strange because normally when I go back to Ireland, it's like going back in time. But actually, it was like going in forward in time for us to see that the problems they're dealing with on the system right now. And actually, we're talking about what we'll need in the future, but just playing what 2 weekends ago were like in the UK, I think it'd be quite interesting. I run the trading team and the demand forecasting team are under me, and I've got the only people who are happy when it's going to be rainy on the weekend. Because we had a system where in the mid-afternoon, the demand was only 23 gigawatts on the system. We had the nuclear generation on. We had 6 gigawatts of solar, which is why we were only seeing 23 gigawatts. And we had over 3 gigawatts of wind on the system. And at that point, there was 65% of the generation was inflexible, low carbon. And that makes managing the system quite challenging because you can't get the other unit. There's not the space to get the other spinning units on to provide response and reserve. And we're really already having to use interconnectors an awful lot to manage the system. And we're seeing right now things that we were expecting in two years' time. But we're now at a position where we've got 11 gigawatts of solar in the system, pretty much. And before I went to France 4 years ago, I was running a research, analysis team. I would have laughed if you told me that when I was doing my analysis. But it's reality. So we're talking about, going and talking about the future, but it's coming at us really, really quickly is what we're finding in National Grid. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, just very briefly, absolutely, completely agree with this. What our analysis demonstrates that UK will need significant amount of this flexibility 5 to 10 years before mainland Europe or the US, and it's all to do with our island position. And that could be a potential opportunity, in a sense, to try to see how
good
we
learning
can...
opportunity, isn't it?
Yes, and maybe then sell this to others, yeah, when they start hitting the same problems.
Yeah, I guess...
Do you have a comment on that as well? Or?
Well, yes. I mean, well, the first thing is that there are kind of sketch plans for about 14 gigawatts of interconnectors in about 10 years' time, which will lighten the load a lot. I think we can learn a lot from other countries which are, in some ways, far in advance of us, like Denmark, for example, and Sweden, where you have very high wind penetration, but you also have high district heat penetration. And when you're looking at the system management, you have to look right across the system. And my own feeling is to go towards a zero carbon renewable system in this country, it's very difficult to see how you can do it without district heating and very big heat stores. And switching between CHP and heat pumps, which gives you a lot of flexibility. I think the idea of combining very high wind capacity with nuclear is maybe technically infeasible. And I think that's something that needs looking at quite seriously.
Sheridan, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of academic and industrial expertise around energy storage. I mean, I know a lot about the electrical, but I think other sorts of energy storage as well in the UK. So with this need we have for it, I think there's a real opportunity to take advantage of that. I guess also the different contexts. I mean, the UK has a grid system, and there's a lot of countries in the world where they don't have a grid yet. I think we're already seeing a lot of solar electrification in India and Africa, largely just through small lanterns at this stage with solar panels and batteries. But there's an analysis that suggests it's the cheapest way to electrify a lot of Africa and parts of India already. And as storage and solar come down in price, there's I guess there are other contexts as well.
So that's a suggestion that they might evolve a totally different system based around lots of local storage, and local generation compared to the...
And very different demand patterns and very different renewable resource, much more solar, for example, and much more even across the year because of the low latitude.
Yeah, I mean...
Okay, so yes, loads of questions. Let's start on this one.
I've got two questions, really. What impact will electric cars have on your projections? And the other question is, why haven't you mentioned tidal power?
Electric vehicles. Shall I say that? Electric vehicles, actually quite low energy consumption, and it take a long time before you will fill up the nighttime trough. Let's say you do most charging overnight.
15 million cars has a low impact?
Yeah.
Well, it depends.
Compared to other electrification.
Yeah.
But it'd be quite a long... Sorry?
Typically, what are the percentages? What is the distribution? What's the percentage? What fraction is electric cars compared with what fraction of domestic and what fraction of industrial?
Well, it depends on your scenario, but...
Well, you're the guy coming...
All right, well, the scenario that we're doing for cities and nationally show that maybe by 2040 or 2050, you will fill up the nighttime trough with electric vehicle charging.
Can I say, in grid, we don't see necessarily the major benefit of storage about the shift from day to night. Nissan are doing some work with Enel, looking at using the battery storage actually to provide us with frequency response. Yep. So that kind of thing it can probably be more useful for in providing response services, where when they're on, it's a bit like a lot of stuff that's happening with air conditioning, etc. right now, where you can flex it about and people don't really notice, but you get to the right point. And we're also doing work in the same way electric cars. We're doing work with electric storage heater people, because it's the exact same idea, where they can provide us with response services and you get to the heat you require, but the path that you get there is just slightly different, but it's providing a service and they don't see the difference. So that's where I see the vehicles as being particularly useful.
I think there was a question there. Oh, sorry.
Tidal power, which you haven't mentioned.
Tidal power, well, you have tidal flow schemes and tidal barrage schemes. Now, tidal flow has no storage, and the tide goes when it goes. Tidal barrage.
It goes rather regularly.
It is very predictable, but even if you look at a disposition of tidal schemes around the UK shores, it's very difficult to get a baseload tidal because the tide times are not sufficiently different. So on the theme of storage, there is no storage in tidal flow underwater turbines, but as soon as you have a barrage, then you have some degree to which you can manipulate the output from the barrage schemes. But of course, barrage schemes, well, both types have cost issues, but barrage schemes particularly have heavy environmental potential problems.
I mean, I think we certainly could see some of a whole range of technologies in the future. I mean, certainly some of the scenarios we've done at Imperial suggest to decarbonise we need to kind of electrify transport or some way of reducing the carbon impact of transport. Also, all the work going into EV batteries is already pushing down the cost of lithium-ion batteries, which, I mean, transport is maybe and one of the early applications for big batteries, but we might see more of them on the grid in the future, and EVs will be important in driving that, I think.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, some years ago I was involved in research that looked into the possibility of having refrigerators with frequency switches. So, and the number of refrigerators and freezers up and down the country is substantial, and they could actually very easily support very quickly, to offload the system if there's a drop in frequency. Have you looked into this?
Yeah.
And the question to another one to Cathy about the way in which Brexit might actually affect our connection to the rest of Europe.
So I can talk about fridge as a freezer a bit first, but then I think I'll pass over to Goran. We actually, and then I'll talk about Brexit again. I've got my Irish passport in my bag, I'm okay. So in terms of fridges and freezers, we buy demand-side response services already off a number of aggregators who take together loads and produce frequency response for us. One of the really good sources of that is supermarket refrigeration schemes. So heating and cooling are both really good for that, for us. And we are looking at that sort of thing. And they're also used as well for peak shaving, if you like. In winter, our networks charge for using triads. And what we find, so basically the top 3 periods of the year under certain rules, demand gets charged for using, for the amount they use over that period. So we find people are trying to avoid those by dropping loads. And again, they can do that over that period and make money on it. But you've also done some work on the domestic side, Goran, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. The value of using refrigeration is going forward very, 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 very big. And our analysis demonstrates that in 2030, National Grid should be giving us fridges for free, and also making sure there is some we would also need to have them working good. We need to have Tamarinasha, so a few beers and champagne
Yeah,
would
he's already
help.
tried this one.
So it's absolutely, that's a really a very, very important point, and hopefully that some of these solutions will develop, because the cost of making these fridges smart is relatively low. And there is a discussion, it's going for some time already in Europe among some part of transmission system operators, whether we should put obligation for appliances to be smart. And one of the fridges will be to do with frequency regulation. The discussion is taking place.
And you also
So the second part was about Brexit. National Grid actually put out their position before the referendum that we believed it was better to be in because of the internal energy market in Europe. The key thing that we're working on now is making sure that, or trying to remain part of that market. So because we're one of a number of grid operators across Europe, and there's a lot of work going on unifying the grid codes. And because we've got the interconnectors, if we remain interconnected to that, we will be subject to the rules of that market. And we still need to have a seat at the table to be able to influence those rules, because already there's always been some differences because we are an island. And quite often all of the others say, oh, well, interconnectors are owned by the transmission operator. And then we go, no, they're not. And so we already have to fight for our place, and that's what we want to continue doing. I think Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, the Irish market have got an even more interesting situation, because you've got one country in and one country out in the same market, but they've already put out a statement that they plan to make it work. So.
Okay, well, that's useful to know.
Yeah, for my parents at least.
Okay, we've got one down here, Tom, if you can, and then up there, yeah.
Hi.
What you have to do is one of those ones you have to shout.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I had just a general question. I like the flexible basket of technologies approach. I've worked in a couple of them on fuel cells specifically, and on storage for grid. Just one comment and then one question. The comment is that the days of fuel cells were so much nicer because we had a fixed cost we were looking for to drive the technology. Whereas in the energy storage field, it's electron arbitrage effectively. You never know exactly what makes sense, or at least I feel like that as a researcher. Yeah. But the question is about the combination is possible with district heating, and also coupled perhaps to producing a chemical product as your storage, which for me sounds like a fuel cell electrolyzer type of thing, but it could be a flow battery in a certain sense. Early on, is it Goran mentioned inefficiency of the batteries, but a fuel cell electrolyzer system is wildly inefficient, coupled, probably about 50% efficiency tops, yet that's an opportunity for heating. The problem comes about in the location of things, because if you have some sort of central plant, how far can your district heating extend? This is just something I don't know. To make use of that waste heat. And then secondly, seasonally, how this is the big problem with fuel cells in Japan. They love the heat in winter, but they don't know how to use it in the summer.
District heating. District heating could probably economically cover maybe 80% of the heat load of the UK. It all depends on what the options are.
Geographical coverage, sorry. How big would one system extend?
Well, you could have a London-based system, but you may have several heat sources in there, some industrial waste heat sources, several CHP plants. You may have your heat pumps dipping into the river or the sea, as they do in Stockholm, to take heat out of the sea. And the great thing about district heating is, A, the economies of scale mean that you can have CHP and heat pumps. When you have a lot of wind power or something, you can use your heat pumps. when you have a deficit, you can run your CHP plants, they have biomass, and you're generating electricity at the time you need it and the heat, so it's fantastic flexibility. You can dynamically change the mix of heating from hour to hour, depending on the conditions at the time of demand and supply elsewhere. And you can change the configuration of heat inputs to your system across the years, and the end user won't notice anything. It's just a pipe with heat coming in. So, and on the question of chemical storage, I think really when you're using electricity to make things, you really don't want to put it through a battery or a fuel cell and come back out again. You want it to make ammonia, and then it goes into the ship for final use. You've got electricity into your electric vehicle battery, then it's used. You don't put it back onto the grid because of the round trip efficiency. Just one other thing to say is that, again, all forms of storage are important. And so you might have batteries, but you might also make biogas. You might have piles of biomass for your CHP plant. That's also storage.
Are there any other comments from the... No? Okay. The man in the green shirt, sorry. If you just wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Hi. Another one that relates to district heating. I think back in my past life, it was if decarbonisation of heat is the question, then district heating is a big part of the answer. I guess storage is coming on top of that as well. My question is not technically how do you achieve it, but how do you actually get the public buy-in to remove because we have a lock-in to boilers and radiators in individual houses, and the public, I suspect, with small c conservative ways, would find it hard to think of another energy system as better than that, even though it is. Can I just get some comment on that?
Shall I take it again? Well, to reach 80% or 100%, we should really be going for something like a 98% carbon emission reduction for parity globally. But even to get 80%, it's very difficult to see how you can do it without district heating. Because let's say you go the electric individual heating route, and as I say, we're ripping out storage out of our houses. If you just turn your power shower on, it's 25 kilowatts of heating there. You just cannot fit a 25 kilowatt heat pump into your house. And if it has no storage, you have to run it whether or not the wind's blowing. So you've got no flexibility there at all. If you make hydrogen and put that into, also with the heat pumps, you'd have such a huge heat load, electrical load, you have to dig the streets up anyway. And the main costs of a network is not the technology, it's digging up the roads. It's the installation cost. And so I think it's quite simple. If you have these targets of low carbon, you tell me a design that anywhere comes near the cost of district heating and that has less disruption than district heating. So I'll bounce it back at you.
It's more, it's not the technical question, it's more the coming to a household and saying, hi, district heating is the way forward. Do you mind awfully if we rip out your boiler? We'll put in a heat exchanger, it'll be wonderful. And how do we get past householders who go, that's not rubbish?
We did that with natural gas in the early 70s. We went into millions of houses and changed the systems. And if you say to them, well, you can have an electric heat pump, and it's going to be that big, and it's going to sound like a Harrier jump jet, that's one option. Or you can have this option, and obviously you need to change tariffs and so on to make it acceptable to people.
Goran, you've got
Well, but there is, in addition to this, there is a very now big interest in not heat pumps and not also DC heating, but to use our gas system and ship hydrogen and burn hydrogen, which is very similar to what you've got gas boiler, and that's it. There is now huge amounts of interest in this, and government is very, very big. That is, we can discuss that maybe outside of this in terms of what the costs and benefits of these options are. And one of the reasons is exactly what you say is minimal disruption. The gas infrastructure is already in there, and we are now, lots of these local pipes are being changed into plastic, and they apparently can handle hydrogen And that, from that perspective, that is certainly now the option one in our government.
Yeah, and National Grid, as the gas transmission operator, is also looking at that in our future gas strategy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the difficulty with the hydrogen route is electrolyzer efficiency 75%, boiler efficiency is 80%, overall efficiency to heat 65%, say, as compared to a district heating heat pump where you've got an efficiency of 200 or 300%. And so what that means is that you need 4 times as many wind turbines at the other end of the wire with the hydrogen route. Well, that means less disruption. So when you start looking at the costs, both capital and operational, then it may not look so good.
But again, you could have a blended solution. Does it all have to be all district heating in the same way? So maybe a bit of both? I don't know. So.
Something to discuss afterwards over a glass of wine, maybe. There's one person over there. We'll slug it out over a glass of wine or something.
Oh, I don't think so.
So you've discussed about all the sort of alternative energy storage methods where you said virtual energy storage is actual energy storage. I've done a bit of work on the cement industry, and you're able to store an intermediate product before spending 40% of the electricity, and so you could use that for demand-side response. What's the most innovative or interesting or game-changing sort of energy storage method that isn't thought of traditionally as energy storage that you know?
Well, thinking about that, I'll give you one other example. Is the average electricity consumption for pumping water in the UK is about 1 gigawatt. And a lot of the water pumping is between reservoirs. What's a reservoir? It's a store. And so there's an example where you might have half a de Norwich equivalent for pumping water.
And we're actually, funnily enough, working with water companies are some of the people who are most interested in our power responsive, because again, it's about shifting load. Yeah. That's all they're doing, shifting when they do the pumping. And it can either be shifting from peak periods to off-peak periods, so the peak lopping, or it can also be flexing for us as part of a group. So I've got a meeting with United Utilities next week where we're talking about some stuff. So you'd be surprised. A lot of industries, when you start naming them, I go, yeah, we're talking to them and we're getting services from them. It really is a growing bit of our business. So, and it's a very, very important bit going forward.
Okay, let's have one up towards the top at the back there. Yeah, the guy in the. Well, yeah, you were beforehand. Okay, yeah. You. Just wait for the microphone to come across. Maybe the guy in the black can also whisper you his question. You can ask both of them. Yeah.
I suppose I'm approaching this question because I'm interested in distributed storage as distributed to the consumer level, and quite interested in the idea, at least, of distributed generation. But it would help in understanding the overall opportunity or the problem to understand the hypothetical extreme scenario. If storage cost-wise was approaching infinitely efficient and infinitely free, how many power stations could we shut down? What proportion of capacity could we remove from the system? And similarly, if through distributed generation and storage, for example, transmission losses could be greatly reduced, again, what proportion of our energy budget is actually currently consumed by transmission, potentially avoidable transmission losses? So, yeah.
Well, transmission losses about 8%.
Well, no. Transmission loss is about 1%. Distribution losses
total
about...
transmission.
Just putting it out there for the transmission operator. But yeah, distribution losses are
just total.
Yeah.
About 6 to 8%.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understood the question, if I'm honest, because So what you're really, so basically, are you trying to say what's the area under the curve? So basically what you're saying is what's the peak versus the trough, and then what's the area under the curve? It's not quite as simple as that because of the intermittency, etc. So I'll have to go off with a spreadsheet and things. Goran will do it afterwards, maybe.
It depends on the timescale as well.
Yeah, that's right. So there's quite a lot of variable, and what we're finding now in the system, which is quite interesting, is we don't have a typical day anymore. No. We used to, for demand forecasting, because we're forecasting demand on the transmission system, we used to say summer days look like this, winter days look like that. Recently at our ops forum, we showed two different Saturdays, one where it was sunny, one where it wasn't, just 1 week apart. And the shape that we see is fundamentally very different. So there isn't anything such as typical anymore, which is what makes it really rather interesting.
Maybe I can just add to this that regarding the value of distributed storage, what our analysis demonstrates is that less than 10% is in this shifting energy from one period to another period. That's a very, very small proportion of the overall value. Supporting the system, balancing of the system, managing the network, doing the frequency regulation, supporting capacity is where the additional values are. And as I say, this shifting is less than 10% of the overall value. So there are massive, and the question there is whether that storage, which is distributed, would be able to access all of these benefits. And that's a very, very big. We are nowhere near close for that to be.
Just add a comment there. It depends very much on what your supply is. If it's 100% renewable and you've got so much offshore and onshore wind and solar, then your requirements for storage would be very different. Let's say you have 50% nuclear, or lots of biomass being shoveled into Drax power station. You get totally different answers. And if you go for a very high renewable system with variable renewables, then you'll need a very large amount of storage. And particularly, you need storage to cover what happens if you get 10 days with no wind and no sun, and it's very cold, and you've got a huge electric heating demand. What do you do then? So you have to have a store, might be fossil, might be biomass, but you need to store for these kinds of conditions. So you need your storage to manage the system from microseconds for frequency and voltage control, right through to periods of months. And even the fluctuation in storage needs from year to year may be plus or minus 20%.
I guess to add to that, though, I mean, there's a number of studies suggesting that for not too much more cost, you can get to kind of 60, 80% renewables with some kind of interconnection and some storage. And certainly in an off-grid context, if you could have free storage, then you would, I think you'd still often want a backup generator, because to make your solar panel big enough to meet all of your demand is going to be both expensive, and the embedded energy in doing that is probably going to make it ineffective for climate change mitigation. But yeah, I think
just one further point. You talk about distributed generation and storage. I would say big is beautiful. Big is cheaper per unit. It's more efficient. You get big diversity factors on it. You don't need space in your buildings. Big is beautiful. The wind turbines get bigger. The solar farms get bigger because they're cheaper.
My constraints get bigger. It depends what you do. And one of the things that storage can be really useful for is allowing more of the renewables on the system without reinforcing the grid. And then local storage is really useful for that, because it can help us manage the constraints on the system. So it depends. I worked for the nuclear industry for 10 years. I worked for BE and EDFs, of course. I think big is beautiful. But then I can see where we can say, distributed systems can be very useful for us. So,
there's a question, for example, if you have a lot of wind, you might need, say, 100 gigawatts of wind to have a very high renewable system. And if your transmission and distribution system, I'll call it in total transmission system, constrains the absorption of that wind, so it's no good having lots of heat pumps and stores in houses and buildings if you can't get that wind power to them. And so you have to again look at the whole system. Well, perhaps I should invest more in distribution transformers, and low voltage distribution might be part of the least cost solution.
Yeah.
So you don't want to fix any part of the system. You have to look at it all.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I think there's one down in the front there and the guy with the black shirt back there. Okay.
Excuse me. Hey, there's been a lot of women put up their hands, and you've never chosen one yet. Could you choose? There's a woman up there that's twice, and there's one up there. Could you please let a woman?
Good evening. With the advances in renewable technology, especially in energy derived from flowing rivers without interrupting the flow of river, can the panel actually see more localised systems and more of a decentralisation of the grid, which would obviously make it easier for you to balance what's needed for those that remain in the grid in the future? And if you can see a decentralisation of the grid network, when would you see that happening?
So I can talk about what we're doing with distribution network operators at the minute. So traditionally we've had a system where the transmission system is an active managed network and the distribution's pretty passive network with the power flowing to. We now have grid supply points, which is the connection between us and the distribution system, where it's an inflow to our system. Okay, so there is so much embedded generation. So a really good one is Western Power Distribution with all of the renewables in the southwest. They actually quite a lot of the time flow into us. And we're working with them at the minute. We've got a service called Demand Turndown, which is actually a service where we're working, it's actually shifting load. But what we've done is develop it with them where it's loads in their network. We've signed it up, but they actually tell us if they want to call it or not, and we're actually sharing a service. And this is one of the issues with all of the smart services and demand side, that the business case isn't stacking up for people at the minute because the services kind of, they can't do them all together, and that's where you need to, as a storage provider or a demand side provider, you need to be in more than one market, and you need to be able to move between those markets to have the flexibility. So we're doing a lot of work in our market design, looking at how we make the products all work together. Yes. So that we can actually build up the business case, and in that way the market's an enabler for things going forward. Yeah. So do you want to add anything to that, Goran?
Yeah, maybe just to, yeah, absolutely, this is the core point, is that the kind of balancing of demand and supply is, electricity system is quite tough. As you know, when you switch the lights on, immediately appears, because there is somewhere gas plant producing a little bit more energy for a light bulb. If you start putting nuclear renewables, and when it's wind produced when it's windy, not when you turn the lights on, and so the amount of controllability at the transmission level is reducing, but at the same time, huge amounts of flexible demand, refrigerators, and all the rest of it is coming, and this is all towards the end of the system. And that's why we need this whole systems approach. We cannot now, because the system which we currently have is being designed and operated in the 19th century, we're now in a different world, and putting all this together is an important aspect. And the controllability is getting down rather than up.
And it's an institutional structural issue. We also license a model to Western Power Distribution, if we work with modelling that. And of course, what you want is really a whole system thing, but we are split between National Grid and the distribution network operators.
And we're looking at how we, through our power responsive campaign, which is about getting more demand side on, it's actually a whole system approach. Yeah. So we're doing it for the whole value chain, and we sit with people like Western Power Distribution and stuff on that. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. Do we want to?
Thank you. Good evening. We're all.
Oh,
we'll get a woman.
You want to do her afterwards.
Yeah.
That's all right. I don't normally need a microphone.
Well, we're just going to go to someone before you, actually, if that's okay, and then we'll go to you next, and then we'll take one final question up here.
Hi, I have a point to make, but also a question to the panelists to hear about their views. and that's about power to gas, which isn't exactly just storage, but it has a component of storage, hydrogen storage. So yesterday we had the H21 Leeds Citygate report being published, which is essentially looking at the feasibility of converting the gas grid in Leeds to hydrogen. Because we talked about having the minimal cost of change to infrastructure and also the reliability of, having 10 days of no wind, but also Mark mentioned the inefficiency of the electrolyzers, for instance. And what they have looked at, because they've been mostly working with the gas networks, Northern Gas Networks was on the project, is converting the methane to hydrogen and using carbon capture and storage. And they, based on the models that they have, they see it as a feasible option for Leeds and for the rest of the UK, but also a cost-viable option. I just wanted to find out what Catherine thinks, what National Grid thinks about this, but also what the rest of the panelists think about this.
You've got me there. I have to admit, I don't know anything about it, so I don't have an opinion at the minute. It sounds interesting. We were quite involved with the carbon capture and storage that was going on in Yorkshire until the funding was removed by the government. So I know we've been interested in that area, but I'm not an expert on National Grid gas, but I can get you in contact with the right person if you're interested in talking further. So apologies that I don't know anything about it, sorry.
Do any of the others want to talk about power to gas and the Leeds, the report on converting Leeds to run on hydrogen?
Actually, it was a part of a study of low carbon gas for National Grid some years ago. The problem, A, is the conversion problem in that 70% efficient, or 80% efficient electrolyzer, and a 60% efficient fuel cell, if you're lucky. 6/8 is 48, 50% overall efficiency, compared to with direct electric heating, which is going to be at least 100% efficient. So our problem is that we have this wonderful gas network, a lot of which has been replaced in recent years. It's absolutely marvellous fuel, but we can't find an easy way of replacing fossil gas with hydrogen or whatever you want to pump through the pipes. And I personally have a real problem with carbon sequestration. For me, it's a little bit like nuclear waste in that, sure, it will stay down there for 1,000 years, but you're not going to be around to make sure it is. And what worries me, it doesn't take a very large fraction of leakage from CCS to make it worse than if you didn't do it. And so I think there's a short term, we've got this gas grid, what can we fill it with? Hydrogen. And they're not really looking at the costs at the other end of all the wind turbines extra you need. And if you're going to make it from methane, A, there's the problem of irreversibility with carbon sequestration, which I think is always a problem. And secondly, you're going to increase your energy consumption of natural gas, which is a premium fuel, which we really want worldwide to use at the system margin as long as possible, because it has so much lower carbon than the alternatives of oil and coal. So I think strategically, in a global sense, it's a mistake to waste natural methane energy.
Yeah, I think that probably there's things like transport. I think might be an easier sell for hydrogen in the medium term, just because you have less options where you can get that kind of energy density. But yeah, I mean, it's just a thought.
Okay, thank you. So we've got the gentleman there, and then someone up there.
Thank you. I just want to ask a little bit about the developments coming out of smart metering. The consumer presumably is getting used to the idea of their energy usage being monitored. Could this go a little bit further? Could we use that technology for smart, flexible demand control? I have the image of the kettles going on after the FA Cup final. They all go on in the same 5-minute period. If you had the level of control that allowed you to delay some of those kettles for 10 minutes, how many de Norwigs would that save us?
Well, I think you get some very annoyed people, and actually, a lot of it is actually from flushing toilets in particular at the break as much as kettles. If you look at the demand increase we had so Wimbledon this weekend, it was about 400 megawatts. My job used to be to price the Norwig for those demand spikes, and you're only talking a few hundred megawatts at that point, actually. In terms of enabling demand-side use in the home, my last job before coming to National Grid was working on the Competition Market Authority's investigation, and particularly looking at the B2C customer base. And the thing that I really learned was most people really don't want to interact with their energy at all. They want it not to have to think about it. Yeah. There's some people who are, and I'm a bit like, I got one of those Hive devices, and I was really interested in it for a few weeks. Yes. And then I'm a geek, and I lost interest. But that doesn't mean what we're talking to a lot of companies who are in homes, either ones that have solar or maybe just looking at controlling devices in the home. And what they have to do is do a wrapper service for people where they say, look, we'll supply everything for you. You don't even have to think about it. And this is what it's about. It's probably the way, when you think about people's psychology, it'll work for the majority of the population. There'll always be some who love it and love all the technology. But I think personally, there'll be the minority when we've done all the research when I was in my old job. Goran, do you disagree? You disagree with me, don't you?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
We think there is a significant opportunity, and we can, what we say, that we need to ask consumers to make a decision whether they're bothered or not bothered. Because what our analysis demonstrates that if you press smart on your appliances without compromise on service quality, all your champagne glasses will be ready when you need them, and you won't be wearing this shirt for 7 days, yeah? So it's all be redone. And your electricity bills will be about 50% of the bills of people who can be bothered. Today is only a few percent difference, but if we go with what governments plan to do with nuclear and renewables, that would be very significant value. I understand the issues regarding the comfort levels and all of that, but lots of this stuff in refrigerators, you would even know that is going on.
I think we're in violent agreement, because what I said is if it's wrapped up in a package and they don't have to think about it, they'll do it. And actually, you need significant value for people to switch anyway. Switching tariffs, a lot of people can save 150, 200 pounds a year switching tariffs, and they don't, because it's too much hassle. So I agree, you can get it into people's home and it can add a big service to it, but it has to be something they don't see and they don't feel at all. They just pay their bill and it all happens, and their bill's a bit lower than it was before. So I think we're in violent agreement. So.
I appreciate my kettle observation was a little bit facetious. Nobody's going to wait 5 minutes for a cup of tea or flush the toilet in 10 minutes' time. But if we had smart control of our refrigerators and freezers in a way that we can detect, if our electric cars, when plugged in, can assist in voltage control and in sucking off extra load or making it available when needed, then there's a possibility there.
Yes, definitely, that's what we're saying.
And for example, in Florida, you get a lower tariff and you subject your air conditioning to the central control, and you won't notice, as Goran says, a degree, but you'll set limits on your service requirements.
If people want to see what's already happening on the demand side, the website powerresponsive.com has got a lot of examples, just mostly from the sort of business side, but including what universities are doing with air conditioning and stuff like that, and they don't even see it. And you can see that as we get more controllable, one of the big things for us is actually getting down to the right level of metering so that we can actually settle the services and stuff like that. Yeah. It's quite important, but there is a lot going on already.
What was the website?
Power responsive. Sorry, power is one of those words you won't understand in my accent. POWER. Responsive.com.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Okay, yes, yes. Just.
Better be a good one.
I like that.
Before, so one of the big things with demand response in homes at the moment is cost, because every bit of kit, if you think one house only has so much demand, so at the moment if you have to put bits of kit in, it's expensive, so it's not actually economic. But anyway, we can talk afterwards. I had a question that actually was already discussed from a this is a challenge, but I was thinking is storage part of a solution, or can it be, which is this kind of longer term fluctuation in wind, and then kind of in the future the kind of winter summer, especially if we do end up reducing the amount of, if we do manage to really increase the amount of low carbon generation.
Give you an example of district heating. In Scandinavia, believe it or not, they have some solar heating going to their district heating, and they have interseasonal heat storage from summer to winter. So that shows how far you can go. If you're, for example, generating ammonia for running your ships, then what you might find is that with the particular configuration of your renewables and your demand, that you have lots of wind in the winter, lots of sun in the summer, and you may have most excess in spring and autumn. So that may be when you make your ammonia, for example. And so you can have very, very big heat stores. And then also, as I say, there's other methods. You just store your biomass. And when you need long-term storage, you might be using biomass or biogas. Or if push comes to shove, every 5 years you'll need to run 50 gigawatts of fossil gas turbines for a couple of weeks.
Would they be around? Why would they not shut?
Because I think you have to plan.
Because you're going to pay for it.
Yeah,
you have to say,
that's right.
Yes.
I think if you want to store a lot of energy over a long term, in terms of electrical energy storage anyway, there's probably less options, and that might be another area where hydrogen is potentially one of your only options for doing that.
Okay, so I suppose what we've learned is that we're in this interesting time now, that we're transitioning from a time when we've actually used fossil fuels as a default energy storage system. Okay, we've stored sunlight in these fossil fuels and we've burnt them when we need them, but of course we're moving to a system where we can't wait a few million years in order for these storage systems to develop. And I suppose in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll be getting a text on our phones from National Grid, quick, have a shower, we need to use some hot water. or it'll be quick, load the fridge with some beer, okay, because we need to use your fridge to cool something down. So
it'll be so seamless, and it'll be 5 years, not 10 years.
So anyway, thank you very much to our panel. They'll be downstairs if you want to have a chat to them later on.